Access denied, the screen flashed. Again? I hadn't even bought groceries that week. She changed the password again. I'm teaching you responsibility, Mom had said, like starving was some kind of lesson. But what broke me wasn't the hunger. It was collapsing at that tech meetup, gasping for air while my brother Ethan knelt beside me and whispered, "You gotta stop blowing cash, sis. People are starting to notice." His hand was on my shoulder, his knife already in my back. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was waking up in the ER and the counselor looking me dead in the eye and saying, "Clara, this isn't love, it's emotional abuse." The betrayal didn't just come from them locking me out. It was discovering who handed them the key. Funny how one locked app can unlock a truth you were never meant to see. If you've ever felt controlled, erased, or betrayed by the people who should have protected you, don't scroll. Hit like. And if your heart already aches for Clara, drop a comment below. I feel you. Funny how one cold sentence I can open every buried scar. 6 months earlier, the screen of my phone glared back at me in the half-dark of my apartment, a white light that made the room seem even more suffocating. My thumb hovered over the banking app as if pressing it harder would change the words staring at me. Access denied. 2 words, flashing like a verdict. My pulse pounded in my ears, loud, insistent, almost animalistic, as if my own body was trying to escape the trap I couldn't see but could feel tightening around me. I sat at my cluttered desk, surrounded by unpaid bills and empty coffee cups. But in that moment, the only thing that existed was the phone and the word no. I blinked hard, once, twice, thinking maybe it was a glitch, but it wasn't. I already knew what this was. Mom had changed the password again. She always said it was for my own good, her way of teaching me responsibility. Tonight, that same excuse echoed like a cruel joke. At 28, freelancing from job to job, juggling late invoices and just enough work to keep the lights on, that trust fund wasn't a luxury. It was the rope I grabbed onto every time I felt like I was slipping. And now it had been yanked out of my hands. The room smelled faintly of stale pizza, paper, and the metallic tang of fear rising in my throat. My fingers trembled against the phone. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control. Every time she locked me out, it felt like she was reminding me she still held the key, not just to the account, but to me. My eyes darted to the stack of unopened envelopes on the desk, each one a reminder of something I owed, something I couldn't push away much longer. Rent, utilities, credit card minimums. My stomach knotted as I imagined the eviction notice, the phone calls from collectors, the shame. I pressed the app again. Access denied. The letters blurred as my vision burned. I whispered to myself, as if maybe saying it out loud would change the weight of it. Not again. Please, not again. My voice cracked in the empty room. No one was here to hear it, but somehow I felt her presence anyway, the way her voice could linger even when she wasn't around. It was as though the walls themselves carried her words. "Prove you're responsible," I could hear her saying. "Then we'll talk." I laughed, but it came out jagged, closer to a sob than anything real. Prove myself? What did that even mean? Did surviving every month scraping by on late nights and deadlines count as nothing? Did keeping a roof over my head on work she never valued mean nothing? My breath hitched, and suddenly the apartment felt too small. The air was thick, my chest tight, as though every unpaid bill on that desk was a hand pressing down on me. The city outside was alive. I could hear it through the thin walls, the hum of traffic, a distant burst of laughter, music leaking from some bar down the block. Austin was moving, breathing, thriving, and here I was, drowning. I pressed my palms to my face, then dragged them down, feeling the grit of exhaustion in my skin. Why now? Why tonight? Why did it feel like she was escalating, turning the screws tighter and tighter with every lockout? I pushed back from the desk, the chair scraping against the wooden floor with a harsh screech that made me flinch. The apartment was dim, lit only by the glow from the phone. The cluttered desk loomed like an accusation, coffee rings staining the surface, crumpled paper scattered with failed sketches, bills marked final notice. The walls seemed closer than they were, shadows pressing in. I caught my reflection in the black window pane, eyes wide, jaw clenched, a person I almost didn't recognize, a person who looked erased. That's what it felt like. This wasn't just about the account. This was about erasure. Every time she did this, it was like she was saying, "You don't exist without me. You can't." And the terrifying part was, maybe she was right. The thought slashed through me, and I pressed a fist to my chest as if I could physically hold myself together. I let out a shaky breath and stood, pacing the narrow strip of floor between my desk and the kitchenette. My mind ran through the numbers, each one slicing me open as it passed. Rent, due in 10 days. Power bill, overdue. Groceries, already stretched. My bank balance without the fund, barely enough to keep me alive. My throat tightened again, panic surging hot and cold through me in waves. What happens when it all collapses? What happens when I can't keep up? I froze mid-step, gripping the back of the chair until my knuckles whitened. A part of me wanted to call her right then, to scream, to demand answers. But I already knew how that conversation would go. She'd be calm, measured, maybe even sweet, her voice dipped in honey while her words cut. She'd talk about responsibility, about how this was for me, about teaching me lessons. She'd twist it so I was the selfish one, the reckless one. And then she'd hang up, leaving me gasping for air in this same apartment with no answers and no lifeline. I sank back down, elbows on my knees, phone hanging useless in my hand. My pulse had slowed, but only just, a heavy throb under my skin. The glow of the screen dimmed and then went black, leaving me in darkness. For a long moment I sat there, listening to the muffled city outside, the hum of my fridge, the silence of my own unraveling. Why was she doing this now? What changed? I tried to trace the moments back, what I said, what I did. But all I came up with was a hollow echo of her power. Maybe it was punishment. Maybe it was something else, something I hadn't seen yet. The thought lodged itself in my chest, sharp and unyielding. This wasn't just money. This wasn't just about bills or responsibility. It was about control, about rewriting the story of who I was, stripping me of autonomy until I barely recognized myself. And worse, it was about timing. She was tightening the noose for a reason, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the question crawl under my skin, refusing to let go. Why now? Why escalate? What was she preparing me for, or pushing me toward? The phone buzzed once in my hand, a notification from some client email I couldn't even bring myself to open. My eyes burned as I blinked against the glow. Somewhere deep down, beneath the panic and dread, a flicker of curiosity sparked. Something was off. Something bigger than just bills and budgets. And I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight until I figured out why. 6 months ago feels both like yesterday and another lifetime. Sometimes I wonder if time actually stopped in that moment, when the lawyer read Dad's will out loud, and my world fractured into before and after. We were gathered at the long oak dining table, the one where every holiday dinner had played out since I was a child. Only this time, there was no warmth in the air, no laughter, just the faint clinking of silverware against untouched plates and the hollow sound of absence, Dad's absence. I remember staring at the lawyer's lips as he spoke, my ears buzzing like static. Ethan would inherit most of the estate, the house, the investments. My share? It was locked behind the words, "Prove yourself." That was it. No definition, no explanation, just those 2 words, vague and cruel, like a riddle meant to crush me. I sat frozen, the smell of roasted chicken wafting from the kitchen, my stomach in knots, my eyes burning. I forced myself to speak, though my throat felt like sandpaper. That can't be right. Dad would never, he wouldn't just cut me off like that. My voice cracked halfway through, and I hated myself for it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smirking, his fork tapping against his plate in a slow, taunting rhythm. "You're a mess," he snapped. "Why should you get more? You can barely keep your own life together. Dad knew that." The words landed like a slap, heat rushing to my face. I wanted to scream, to throw my glass at him, but all I managed was to grip the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. Mom didn't defend me. She sat perfectly still, her eyes on her wineglass, swirling it gently as if we were discussing the weather. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. "Your father only wanted what was best for you, Clara. If you can show us you're responsible, you'll get your share. Until then, it stays locked." The air around me thickened. Responsible. That word again, heavy as chains. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, every second louder than the last, as if counting down to some invisible deadline I hadn't chosen. My chest ached with grief and betrayal, colliding so violently that I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Dinner ended with silence, plates pushed away, the scent of food lingering like mockery. I went home that night with the taste of bitterness on my tongue and a question that wouldn't stop repeating in my head. Did Dad really believe I wasn't worthy? Or was someone twisting his last words into a weapon against me? A week later, while still fumbling through the fog of grief, I received an email from Dad's lawyer. The subject line was simple: regarding your father's will. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, one line stood out, more cryptic than comforting. There's a clause you need to see. A clause? What clause? My heart raced, a fragile hope threading its way through the despair. Maybe Dad had left something behind for me, something hidden. Maybe he knew. Maybe he anticipated that Mom and Ethan would tighten their grip and he'd built in a safeguard, a lifeline. I read the line over and over until the words blurred, but the lawyer never elaborated. No attachment, no details. Just that single sentence, dangling like a key I couldn't find. That night I drove to Dad's old office. The house smelled of dust and disuse, shadows draped over the furniture like mourning veils. His desk sat heavy and solemn in the corner, the surface still littered with papers as though he'd just stepped away. My hand hovered over the drawers, most of them locked. I tugged at the handles anyway, desperate, half expecting them to open, half praying for a sign. They didn't budge. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the creak of the old floorboards under my weight. I stood there, staring at the locked drawers, my reflection caught in the glass of a framed family photo on the wall, Dad smiling wide, his arm around me. I wanted to believe he had seen me, that he had trusted me, in a way Mom and Ethan never would. But standing in that dusty office, I couldn't shake the feeling of being haunted, not just by his death, but by the secrets he might have taken with him. Every punishment that came after the dinner felt like confirmation. Transfers delayed without explanation, allowances slashed in half. Each move from Mom wasn't just about money. It was about power, about reminding me where I stood, and each time I pushed back, I paid for it. Sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I replay that night at the dinner table. Ethan's smug smile, Mom's detached calm, the lawyer's flat delivery. My grief twisted into suspicion. Did Dad really choose those words? Prove yourself? Or did someone else write them into existence? Was the hidden clause my only chance to know the truth? I sit with those memories now, the phone still warm in my hand from the earlier lockout. The same panic surges as I calculate unpaid bills, but it's different too, heavier, sharper, because beneath the fear lies a gnawing question that won't let me go. Did Dad know they'd turn on me like this? The harsh glow of my laptop was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across the piles of unopened mail and dirty dishes stacked on the counter. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale takeout, like the residue of days that blurred together. My head throbbed from hours of staring at the screen, forcing my eyes to focus on the mock-up I'd been tweaking for a client pitch. But no matter how many times I adjusted the layout, the colors, the fonts, it all looked wrong. My mind was foggy, like I was trying to work underwater, every thought slowed down and heavy. A notification popped up at the corner of my screen. My heart jolted. The client's name. For one desperate second, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe they loved it. Maybe this was the one chance I had to crawl out of this hole. I clicked, holding my breath, the room silent except for the hum of my old laptop fan. The email opened in front of me, the words glaring in black and white. Your work's below standard. We're going with someone else. I stared, my stomach dropping. The words blurred, then sharpened, stabbing me over and over. Below standard. Just like that, weeks of restless nights and frantic days were reduced to one sentence that cut deeper than it should have. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady the hammering inside, but it only grew louder. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. The calendar taped to the wall caught my eye, red marker circling the first of the month. Rent was looming, less than 2 weeks away. I pictured my landlord's face, the awkward smile he gave the last time he hinted that patience only stretched so far. I imagined the sound of eviction papers sliding under my door, the shame of dragging bags of my clothes down the street while neighbors watched. My breaths quickened. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, as though holding on could stop everything from spinning. But the panic only tightened. My laptop screen seemed too bright, the cursor blinking on a blank page like it was mocking me. The world outside the window didn't care. I could hear Austin's nightlife humming, distant laughter, music bleeding from a bar, a car horn blaring in frustration. The city pulsed with energy while I sat here unraveling, trapped in my dim apartment, every wall inching closer. I rubbed my temples, willing myself to refocus, to try again, but my fingers shook as they hovered over the keyboard. Nothing came, just emptiness. The shrill ring of my phone startled me so hard I nearly knocked over the mug beside me. I snatched it up, pulse racing. Maybe it was a client reconsidering. Maybe it was hope. But when the name flashed across the screen, my stomach dropped again. Ethan. I answered anyway because ignoring him would only make it worse. "You sound like hell," he said, not bothering to hide the disgust. His voice oozed with superiority, the kind of tone that made me feel 10 years old again. "What's the problem this time? Another meltdown?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I lost a client, that's all." His chuckle was sharp, grating. "Quit whining. You're spoiled rotten, Clara. Always have been. Dad knew it, Mom knows it, and deep down, so do you." The words pierced through me, heavier than the rejection email. Spoiled. Rotten. Worthless. He didn't even wait for me to defend myself. "You've got no one to blame but yourself," he added. And then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen as if it had just spit venom into my ear. My chest rose and fell in jagged bursts. "They're strangling me," I thought. "And I'm supposed to just take it?" My gaze drifted to the window, to my own faint reflection staring back. Pale skin, dark circles, eyes that looked haunted. I barely recognized myself. I let the phone slip from my hand and clatter onto the desk. My hands moved automatically to another screen, this time opening my text messages. "Hey, just deadlines, I'll be fine." I typed it to Mia, the lie rolling off my fingers before I could stop myself. I hit send, then dropped the phone face down, as if that could bury the truth. She didn't need to know. No one did. Admitting how bad it was felt like giving up. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking clock on the wall. Each tick seemed louder, heavier, pressing down on me alongside the rejection, Ethan's cruelty, and the looming threat of eviction. The air itself felt thin, my breath shallow as though the oxygen had been rationed. I drummed my fingers against the desk, the sound echoing in the cramped room. My laptop screen dimmed, plunging me into deeper shadow. I didn't move. I couldn't. For a terrifying second, I wondered if Ethan was right. Maybe I really was spoiled, incapable, undeserving. The thought slithered cold through my veins, a poison I couldn't shake. I shook my head, trying to banish it, but it clung stubbornly. I pressed my palms flat on the desk, forcing myself to breathe, each inhale shaky, each exhale ragged. The blinds rattled faintly as a breeze pushed against the window, the city's neon bleeding through in stripes of light and dark across my arms. Life was still moving out there. Inside, I was stuck, trapped in a loop of fear and failure. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands against them until stars danced behind the lids. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. Not with my heart racing, not with this chokehold tightening around me. Something had to give, something had to break. And if it wasn't the walls closing in, it was going to be me. The apartment was dark, too dark. The kind of darkness that presses against your skin and makes you feel smaller with every breath. It was 2 a.m., the hour where the city outside still pulsed faintly with life, but my own world had shrunk to silence and shadows. Sleep hadn't come, couldn't come. My mind was a tangle of rejection emails, Ethan's voice calling me spoiled, and the unbearable image of eviction. So instead of lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself pacing, pulling open drawers, rifling through boxes I hadn't touched in months, as though somewhere hidden in the chaos of my own things, there might be an answer. That was when I saw it, pushed to the back of the closet, beneath a stack of old sketchbooks and a shoebox of receipts. There it was, a small, heavy box I didn't remember bringing here. My heart thudded once hard as I dragged it out. The cardboard scraped against the wooden floor, the sound harsh in the silence. The box wasn't ordinary. It was dark metal, cold to the touch, with a tarnished latch that refused to open without a key. And taped to the lid, in Dad's handwriting I knew by heart, were the words, "Family Trust." My breath caught. Beneath that, a smaller note. The ink smudged but legible. "Attic Secrets." I traced the letters with my fingers, trembling. The sight of Dad's writing hit me like a punch. Familiar, intimate, achingly absent. For a moment, the air in the apartment shifted, like he was standing behind me. My throat tightened, and I whispered into the quiet, "Dad, what were you trying to tell me?" But the box stayed closed, heavy with answers I couldn't reach. I tugged at the latch, nails scraping, but it didn't budge. No key, just frustration, raw and biting. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow. It was here, right here in front of me, some piece of the truth I'd been clawing for since his death, and I couldn't touch it. The frustration boiled over. I shoved the box back onto the desk, the metallic thud echoing through the apartment. My head dropped into my hands, palms pressing hard against my eyes until stars burst behind them. I felt like I was unraveling, like every part of me was pulling in opposite directions: grief, anger, desperation, fear. And under it all, the same question beating relentlessly. Was Dad still trying to protect me, even now? By dawn, the apartment smelled of stale sweat and anxiety. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since the afternoon. I looked at the fridge and knew better than to open it. The shelves were nearly bare. My eyes fell to the watch on my wrist, the only thing of value I still carried. Dad had given it to me when I graduated college. The band was worn, the face scratched, but it still ticked faithfully, even when I felt like I'd stopped. I unclasped it slowly, my hands shaking. The weight of it in my palm was heavier than it should have been. Pawning it felt like betrayal, like cutting the last thread tying me to him. But hunger won, survival won. The pawn shop was lit in garish neon, the sign buzzing faintly in the humid night air. Inside it smelled of metal and dust, a strange mix of desperation and lost stories. The man behind the counter barely looked at me as I slid the watch forward. His hands were rough, indifferent, as he turned it over once, then named a price that felt like an insult. I nodded anyway, swallowing the lump in my throat. The cash slid into my hand, thin and dirty, and I walked out into the street feeling emptier than before. Groceries, that's what I told myself as I clutched the bills tight, but the neon lights reflected off the store windows made me feel like I was on display, a girl stripped of pride, surviving on scraps of what her family once promised her. The night air was damp, heavy against my skin, and I pulled my jacket tighter even though it wasn't cold. Back in the apartment, the box still sat on the desk like it had been waiting. I dropped the groceries onto the counter and sat, staring at it. My phone buzzed. I flinched, the sound slicing through the silence. A text, no name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message was short, stark, chilling. Check the attic before it's too late. My heart slammed against my ribs. My fingers gripped the phone tighter, reading the words again and again. My skin prickled, every hair on my arms rising. Who would send this? How did they know? I glanced at the box, Dad's handwriting glaring back at me. Attic Secrets. The air in the apartment felt suddenly colder, charged with something I couldn't name. I stood slowly, backing away from the desk like the box might move if I looked at it too long. My breath was loud in my ears, shaky, uneven. Before it's too late. Too late for what? What was waiting in the attic? The question sat heavy in my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Suspense coiled inside me, sharp and urgent as though the clock had already started ticking, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. The air inside the bar was thick with noise, clinking glasses, overlapping voices, bursts of laughter rising above the hum of conversation. Neon signs glowed in the corners, splashing the room with restless color, and the smell of beer and cheap nachos hung heavy in the air. The Austin Tech meetup was in full swing, every table buzzing with people exchanging ideas, pitching projects, chasing opportunities. I was supposed to be one of them. I stood near the makeshift stage, laptop open, a slideshow waiting behind me. My palms were damp, slick against the clicker, and my throat felt dry despite the half-empty glass of water I'd chugged moments earlier. I tried to steady my breathing, to convince myself I could do this. Just one pitch, land one gig, and maybe I'd have enough to hold off the landlord. Enough to prove I wasn't the failure they all believed me to be. When I opened my mouth, my voice wavered, too soft at first, almost drowned out by the chatter in the back. I cleared my throat, pushed harder. "Hi, I'm Clara Hayes, a freelance designer specializing in..." But even as the words left me, my hands betrayed me. They shook so violently that the clicker slipped, clattering to the floor. A few people glanced up, eyebrows raised, the faintest ripple of disinterest moving through the crowd. Heat surged up my neck. I bent to grab the device, forcing a smile that felt painted on, and continued. The slides behind me flickered, displaying the designs I'd spent sleepless nights perfecting. I gestured at them, trying to sound confident. "These projects represent my ability to create..." The edges of my vision blurred. The room tilted, the voices merging into a roar that pressed against my skull. My heart hammered so fast it didn't feel like a beat anymore, just a wild flutter trapped in my chest. My breath hitched. I tried to swallow, but the air was too thick. My words stumbled, my tongue heavy. The clicker slipped again. My knees buckled. A sharp ringing filled my ears, drowning out everything. And then I collapsed. The floor rushed up, cold against my palms, and the world spun. The buzz of voices sharpened into gasps, chairs scraping, footsteps rushing closer. My lungs refused to fill. Every inhale was shallow, panicked. My hands clawed at the floor as though I could anchor myself, but the ground kept slipping away. "Clara!" A voice cut through the fog, frantic and sharp. I blinked and saw Mia's face hovering over me, her hands pressing gently against my shoulders. Her eyes were wide, full of concern that almost made me believe it. "You're falling apart. What's wrong?" I tried to shake my head, words catching in my throat. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not here. Not now. Not about the locked account, the rejection emails, Ethan's cruelty. "Just stress," I croaked, the words ragged. "Deadlines. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. My chest ached, my body trembling. Every nerve felt exposed, raw. The noise of the bar swelled and shrank, the crowd forming a circle around me, their whispers and stares cutting deeper than any knife. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the blade, I heard a voice I knew too well. Smooth, confident, laced with amusement. "Clara." Ethan stepped into the circle, smiling that perfect smile he always wore in public, the one that made strangers trust him instantly. He crouched beside me, his hand on my arm, a show of brotherly concern for anyone watching. But his eyes glittered with something sharper. "You gotta stop blowing cash, sis," he said softly enough that only I could hear, his smile never faltering. "People are starting to notice." The words slid under my skin like ice, sharp and deliberate. My chest tightened further, humiliation flooding me. He looked up at the crowd, still smiling, still playing the part of the charming older brother, while I lay there trembling on the floor. My head spun. I wanted to scream at him, to shove him away, to tell the room he was lying, that he was part of the reason I was here on the floor choking on panic, but the words wouldn't come. My body was too heavy, my throat too tight. The sound of Mia's voice blurred with the crowd's noise, her hands gripping mine tightly. "Breathe, Clara, just breathe," she urged. But breathing felt impossible. My lungs refused to obey. The neon lights above blurred into streaks of color. The music that had been playing moments earlier was cut, leaving only the heavy buzz of whispered judgment and the ringing in my ears. I pressed my palms flat against the floor, desperate to hold on to something, anything. I can't keep pretending I'm okay. The thought slammed into me with a clarity that made me shudder. I wasn't okay. I hadn't been for a long time. The walls of the bar seemed to close in, the circle of faces around me pressing closer. The smell of beer turned sour, cloying. My heart raced harder until every beat was a painful slam in my chest. And then everything started to fade. The lights dimming, the sounds blurring into one low hum, the edges of the room dissolving. The last thing I saw was Mia's face, her lips moving, calling my name before the darkness swallowed me whole. The first thing I heard was the steady beep, a metronome of survival. Beep, beep, beep. My eyelids felt like they were weighed down with sandbags, but I forced them open. The ceiling above me was white, too white, washed in the harsh glow of fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly like trapped insects. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The smell of antiseptic hit me next, sharp and sterile, and then the reality snapped into place. I was in the ER. I tried to move, but wires clung to me, monitors flashing green and red, numbers tracking everything I didn't want anyone to see. My chest felt heavy but lighter than before, as though someone had peeled back the suffocating panic by force. My throat was dry, aching, like I'd been screaming in my sleep. A nurse adjusted a drip at my side, her movements brisk, professional. She glanced down at me, offered a neutral smile, then slipped out without a word. The curtain rustled closed, leaving me in a bubble of white noise. The distant shuffle of shoes on linoleum, the murmur of voices, the beep-beep of machines that didn't let me forget where I was. I pressed my palms against the blanket, grounding myself. The memory of collapsing at the bar rushed back. Mia's voice, Ethan's jab, the blur of faces staring. My stomach twisted. Shame burned hot under my skin. I wanted to disappear, to peel myself out of this fragile body and float away from the stares, the whispers, the pity. The curtain pulled back again, and instead of a doctor, a woman stepped in, mid-40s maybe, with calm eyes that somehow felt sharper than the lights above. She wore a blazer over her blouse, not scrubs. A counselor. My pulse quickened, but her expression was steady, patient. She pulled up a chair and sat, leaning slightly forward like she was careful not to crowd me. "I'm Dr. Karen Lee," she said softly. "The doctors told me your body shut down from severe anxiety. That's why you collapsed. You're safe now, but I'd like to understand what's happening in your life. What's weighing on you?" Her voice was low, steady, almost soothing, but it was also a mirror forcing me to see the cracks I'd been pretending weren't there. I swallowed, my throat raw. The words fought me, stuck behind my teeth. If I told her, if I laid it all out, would she believe me? Or would she look at me the way Mom did, like I was exaggerating, like I was broken on purpose? My hands clenched the blanket. "It's my family," I whispered, my voice trembling. "My mom and my brother. They lock me out of the trust fund. Dad's trust. It's supposed to be mine too, but they use it like a leash. Every time I ask questions, every time I push back, they change the password, cut me off, make me beg. I can't breathe. I can't live without it, and they know that." The tears came before I could stop them, hot and humiliating, sliding down into my hair. "They say it's to teach me responsibility, but it feels like they're—" My voice cracked. "It feels like they're erasing me." For the first time in months, I didn't hear my mother's voice in my head telling me I was reckless. I didn't hear Ethan sneering spoiled. I only heard the sound of my own confession, fragile and real, hanging in the sterile air. Dr. Lee didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on me, kind but unwavering. She let the silence stretch just long enough for me to breathe again. Then she spoke, her tone steady, almost surgical. "Clara, this isn't discipline. It's not love. It's manipulation, emotional abuse." The words landed heavy but not cruel. They hit with the weight of truth, pressing against my ribs. Abuse. The word echoed, foreign but familiar. My stomach turned. Was that what this was? Had I been making excuses for them all this time, calling it lessons, calling it family, when really it was just control? My hands shook under the blanket. But they're my family. What do I even do? How do I fight them? Her gaze sharpened, not cruel but firm. "You take back your power. There are legal paths. Your father's will, the trust, the documents, you have rights. What they're doing isn't just cruel, it could be unlawful. You don't have to keep letting them dictate your life." I looked at her, my mouth half open, words failing. My chest felt raw, split open, exposed. A part of me wanted to argue, to say I was weak, that maybe they were right, that maybe I deserved this. But another part, the part that had dragged me through rejection, through hunger, through panic, latched onto her words like oxygen. Abuse, legal action, power. I let my head fall back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My heart pounded, but not with panic this time, with something different. Something that felt like the edge of anger or maybe survival. Is this abuse, or am I just weak? The question gnawed at me, but her words wouldn't let go. This isn't discipline, it's manipulation. The monitor beside me beeped faster, matching the rhythm of my thoughts. The sterile white room suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a crossroads. One path led back to silence, to letting Mom and Ethan dictate the terms of my life. The other led somewhere terrifying, unknown, but maybe free. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. The door to my ER room swung open so hard it rattled against the stopper, a jarring sound that sent my pulse spiking. The steady beep of the monitor jumped in perfect sync with my chest. I expected a nurse, maybe another doctor, but instead it was them. My mother, Ethan, and their lawyer marched in like they owned the place, their footsteps sharp against the linoleum floor. Their presence turned the sterile room heavy, the air itself tilting into something hostile. Before they said a word, I smelled it. That perfume. My mother's signature scent, icy floral layered with something sharp, expensive, and suffocating. It clashed violently with the antiseptic tang of the ER, overwhelming me, choking me. She wore it like armor, like every time she'd leaned close in the past to remind me of my shortcomings, to tell me responsibility wasn't something I could handle. Now here, it felt like she was staking her claim over the room. She didn't come close. She didn't touch me. She stood tall at the foot of my bed, her pearl earrings glinting beneath the fluorescent glare, and addressed me as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Clara," she began, her tone polished, rehearsed. "We've been trying to help you. You're blowing through money like water, and we're the ones left cleaning up your mess." Her words hit harder than the machine's relentless beeping. My throat tightened and my voice came out strained, barely above a whisper. "That's not true. You lock me out. You cut me off. You—" Ethan interrupted with a mocking laugh, leaning casually against the wall as if he were at a cocktail party instead of an ER. His posture screamed confidence, superiority. "Come on, sis," he said, shaking his head. "Everybody knows you can't manage a dime without screwing it up. We're saving you from yourself." The smirk that tugged at his mouth made my blood boil. He was enjoying this. Their lawyer, clean-cut, polished, and detached, opened a folder with deliberate precision. Papers shifted under his manicured fingers. "We have records," he said smoothly, not even glancing up at me. "Excessive spending, poor financial judgment. This is about protecting the estate, not punishing you." His tone was clinical, final, as if my life had already been reduced to evidence in a case I wasn't even allowed to defend. Heat flushed up my neck. My hands twisted in the hospital blanket until the fabric bunched painfully in my fists. The monitor betrayed me, its beep speeding, exposing the chaos I couldn't hide. My chest burned, a knot of humiliation, anger, and despair pressing harder against my ribs. How dare they? How dare they rewrite the story of my life while I sat there strapped to monitors, stripped down to weakness? Dr. Karen Lee, the counselor who had spoken with me earlier, stepped closer to my bed. Her presence was steady, grounding, her voice calm but firm as steel. "Her cortisol levels are through the roof," she said, pointing toward the test results clipped to the monitor. "The evidence is clear. Her body is under extreme chronic stress. This isn't about spending, it's about control." For the first time, my mother's mask faltered. A shadow of irritation flickered across her face before she smoothed it back into her trademark cold smile. She tilted her chin slightly, her voice light but laced with poison. "Stress comes from poor choices. She's always been dramatic, Karen, always craving attention. You don't know her like we do." Gaslighting. The word screamed in my head. I could feel reality tilting again, the ground beneath me shifting as she spoke. The monitor beside me quickened its frantic rhythm, a mirror of my panic. I forced the words out, hoarse but cutting. "You're lying. You know you are." Ethan stepped forward, his smirk turning crueler, his voice lowering into something only I could truly hear. "Dad knew you'd waste everything. That's why he never trusted you." The words sliced straight into the rawest part of me, the secret terror I'd carried since the will was read. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, my father really had doubted me. The thought hollowed me, even as anger surged to fill the space. Before I could speak, Dr. Lee's voice cut through. She'd taken one of the papers from the lawyer's folder, scanning it closely. Then she stilled. Her brows knit together. She tapped her finger against the bottom of the page, then looked up sharply. "This signature doesn't match your father's." The room went still. Even the monitor seemed louder in the silence that followed. My mother's perfume thickened, cloying, sickening. Ethan's smirk faltered, flickering with something like unease before it snapped back in place. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat, his grip tightening on the folder. My pulse thundered. A forged signature. Fraud. My heart slammed against my ribs as the realization settled over me, like fire and ice. This wasn't just cruelty. This wasn't just control. It was criminal. But my mother didn't miss a beat. She straightened, lifting her chin, her smile sharpening to a blade. "You're grasping at straws," she said coolly. "My husband trusted me to manage things. If the signature looks different, it's because he was sick. He was tired." Her words were steady, but her eyes betrayed her. A flicker, a shadow, the faintest tremor. She was lying, and I wasn't the only one who saw it. Dr. Lee's gaze didn't waver. I looked between them, my mother's icy composure, Ethan's smirk, the lawyer's forced calm, and I felt my hands tremble against the sheets. They were lying to my face, lying to everyone, spinning their narrative without shame. They're lying to everyone. How do they live with themselves? Rage surged through me, hotter than my fear, heavier than my shame. It spread like wildfire, setting every nerve alight. They wanted me to shrink, to cower, to doubt myself into silence. But the fury boiling inside refused to be quiet. The monitor beeped faster, climbing in tandem with my anger. My mother's perfume clashed with the antiseptic sting of the hospital air until the room felt unbreathable. My eyes burned with tears, but they weren't just grief anymore. They were fury, the kind that demanded truth. This wasn't a family disagreement. This wasn't discipline or care. This was betrayal, weaponized with lies and signatures forged in shadows. And in that sterile ER, with the walls closing in, I realized something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. The apartment was still, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing in from every wall. The only sound came from the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional buzz of traffic drifting up from the Austin streets below. My desk lamp was off. I couldn't bear its harsh glare tonight. Instead, I sat in darkness, my face lit only by the cold glow of my phone screen. The light carved deep shadows across the clutter of my desk, the unopened bills, half-crumpled sketches, and in the corner, the locked box. Its metallic surface reflected the faint light back at me, an unblinking eye that seemed to watch everything. I scrolled without thinking, my thumb dragging down the screen like it had a life of its own. My body was still drained from the hospital, but my mind refused to rest. I told myself I was just distracting myself, that I wasn't searching for anything. But then a notification blinked across the screen, a thread I didn't recognize. My pulse jumped. I opened it, frowning at first, then freezing. It was a message from Mia, not to me, to Ethan. "Don't worry, I'll make sure she doesn't go digging too far. She trusts me. She always does." My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, convinced I'd misread it. But no, the words burned sharp and clear, searing into my chest. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the desk, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. My hands shook as I picked it up again, staring at the text until the letters blurred with tears. Mia, my best friend. The person who had rushed to me at the tech meetup, whose arms had steadied me when my body gave out, whose voice was the last thing I heard before the world went black, feeding Ethan information, feeding him everything. A chill swept through me, colder than the sterile ER I had just left days ago. The apartment seemed to tilt, shadows stretching too far across the floor, the ceiling feeling lower. My chest tightened, my breathing shallow. I pressed my palms against my face and whispered into the dark, "No, not Mia, not her." The words cracked, as fragile as I felt, but the text was there. She always does. I stumbled up from the chair, pacing the narrow strip of floor between the desk and the kitchen. Every memory of Mia replayed in jagged flashes. Her nervous laugh at the meetup, the way her eyes darted when she asked if I was okay, how she'd brushed off my collapse as stress, like it was nothing. My stomach turned. Had it all been an act? Was Mia ever really on my side? The question tore through me, raw and relentless. I grabbed my phone again, typing out a message with trembling fingers. "We need to talk. Now." I deleted it twice before sending, my thumb slipping from the sweat on my skin. Her reply came almost instantly. "Sure." Park? Too quick. Too easy. My gut clenched tighter. The park near her place was nearly deserted when I arrived. Night had draped the world in a damp hush, the air thick with the smell of wet grass. Streetlights flickered along the path, spilling weak pools of yellow light onto the ground. The trees swayed in the breeze, their branches whispering against each other like they were keeping secrets. I spotted her on a bench, hunched over her phone, her face ghostly in the glow. She looked up at the sound of my steps, a smile spreading across her face. It was warm on the surface, but her eyes betrayed her. They didn't shine the way they used to. "Clara," she said, standing, arms outstretched for a hug. Her embrace was warm, familiar, but I pulled away too quickly. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "I saw your text." My voice shook, louder than the rustling leaves around us. "The one to Ethan." Her face faltered just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Her eyes flicked sideways, her hand brushing her hair nervously. Then she let out a shaky laugh. "What are you talking about? Chill, Clara, you're stressed. You've been through so much. You probably misread it." I stared at her, searching her face in the dim light. Every twitch, every nervous glance screamed louder than her words. My chest pounded, a mix of rage and heartbreak clawing at me. "You sent it," I said softly, my voice breaking. "You've been telling Ethan everything." Her hands shot up, palms out in mock surrender, another laugh spilling out, higher, sharper than normal. "You're paranoid, come on, you know I'd never—" But her eyes darted again, a nervous tick she couldn't control. That glance, quick, guilty, betraying. The pit in my stomach hardened into a stone. Dr. Lee's words echoed in my head. "You don't have to let them dictate your life. Hire someone. Get proof." At the time it had seemed extreme, like something from another world. But now? With Mia's betrayal slicing through me, the idea of a private investigator no longer felt drastic. It felt necessary. She kept talking, filling the silence with more shaky laughter, her words tumbling into the night air. But I barely heard them. The trees rustled louder, their leaves hissing like they knew the truth better than she did. The streetlight above flickered, throwing shadows across her face, distorting it, making her look like a stranger. I turned away, my feet heavy on the gravel path, my mind a storm. The locked box waited back on my desk, its silence louder than ever. My father's truth was sealed inside, but now I understood something chilling. I couldn't trust anyone around me to help me find it. Not Mom, not Ethan, and not Mia. The night air wrapped cold fingers around my neck as I walked home. Every shadow seemed to stretch, reaching for me. My phone weighed heavy in my pocket, the screen still holding her words like a scar. She trusts me, she always does, but not anymore, not ever again. The coffee shop was alive with noise, grinding espresso machines, the hiss of steaming milk, clinking cups, and the hum of a dozen overlapping conversations. But for me, all of it blurred into background static. My focus was pinned to the small table in the corner where I sat across from the private investigator Dr. Lee had connected me with. His worn leather satchel was on the chair beside him, stuffed with files. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He leaned forward, voice low but steady, as if each word carried the weight of something irreversible. "Your brother's been sleeping with the lawyer," he said, "the one who helped execute the will, the same lawyer who's been controlling access to the trust." My heart thudded against my ribs, too loud in my ears. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. I gripped the paper cup in my hand so tightly that the cardboard bent, hot coffee seeping through the seam and scalding my palm. I barely felt it. "Ethan! And the lawyer!" My voice cracked on the words. The PI nodded, sliding a file across the table. "Emails, hotel records, even surveillance. They forged your father's signature together. The lawyer took her cut. Ethan got control. And you? They left you starving." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I forced my shaking hands to open the file, each page a dagger. Copies of emails, bank transfers, photographs. My brother's face, smiling casually as if he hadn't dismantled my life behind closed doors. My stomach churned. He destroyed me just for money." The PI's eyes softened briefly, though his tone stayed firm. "And power. This was never about teaching you discipline. It was about erasing you from the equation." I swallowed hard, bile rising in my throat. I thought I'd already reached the limit of betrayal. I was wrong. The sound of a chair scraping made me look up. Mia stood there, her arms crossed, her face pale but her eyes sharp. She'd insisted on coming when I texted her earlier demanding answers. I hadn't known why I said yes. Maybe some part of me still needed to hear it from her. Her lips curled into a smirk I'd never seen before, cold and unrecognizable. "You really didn't see it, did you?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I've been feeding Ethan everything since Dad died. Every move you made, every little plan. I handed it to him on a silver platter. You were always too naive to see it." The words sliced through me, sharper than Ethan's insults, sharper even than Mom's gaslighting. Naive. The word burned. My chest ached like the air itself was poison. "Why?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "You were my friend. I trusted you." She tilted her head, her smirk widening, cruel. "Because it was easy. Because you trusted me. You always did." The PI stiffened beside me, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, locked in place while my insides unraveled. Every laugh we'd shared, every hug, every promise of loyalty, it all replayed in my mind, warped now into scenes of betrayal. They both played me. How could I be so blind? Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her that. I wouldn't give Ethan that. The PI's voice broke through the ringing in my ears. "It's enough. We have the evidence. Clara, your testimony will seal it." What followed blurred into a montage of cold hallways and hushed meetings. The PI's evidence submitted. Dr. Lee by my side, steadying me when my knees threatened to give out. My signature scrawled on papers that felt heavier than lead. And then, the courtroom. The air inside was electric, every breath sharp with tension. The judge's gavel echoed like a gunshot as the charges were read. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Ethan sat at the defense table, his suit immaculate, his posture arrogant. He looked at me once, just once, and his smirk was identical to Mia's, the smirk of someone who believed they'd always win. But then, the evidence played. Emails, records, signatures compared side by side until the forgery was undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan's jaw tightened, his mask cracking for the first time. The lawyer beside him fidgeted, sweat glistening under the harsh lights. And when Mia was called to testify, her smirk finally faltered. She tried to backpedal, to minimize, but the PI's records cut her excuses to pieces. When the gavel fell at last, ordering Ethan's arrest, the air in the courtroom seemed to shatter. The bailiff moved in, handcuffs clinking louder than any of the whispers. Ethan's smirk was gone, replaced by a twisted glare that burned into me even as he was led away. My chest heaved, relief and heartbreak colliding in waves. Justice crackled in the air, but the sting of betrayal lingered, raw and unhealed. Freedom felt close, but it didn't erase the wreckage left behind. As I stepped out of the courtroom into the blinding Texas sun, my legs shook beneath me. I should have felt lighter, but the weight hadn't lifted. The double betrayal clung to me like a second skin. Ethan, my brother. Mia, my best friend. They had gutted me together, and for what? I closed my eyes, the sunlight searing hot against my lids. The image of Mom surfaced, her perfume, her cold smile, her denial. She was still waiting. And I knew this wasn't over. The war had only begun. The drive out to Mom's house felt longer than it should have. Suburban streets stretched endlessly, each one lined with manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, and houses that looked almost identical, perfect from the outside, hollow on the inside. My chest tightened with every turn of the wheel. I'd spent years trying to avoid this place, but now I was being pulled back, like gravity dragging me into orbit around a star that had long since burned cold. When I finally pulled up to the house, it stood pristine as ever, a magazine cover version of suburban perfection. White shutters gleamed in the morning light, the front lawn trimmed to surgical precision, not a blade of grass out of place. But I knew better. Perfection was her mask, just like the perfume she always wore. Inside, it was a tomb of secrets. I rang the bell, though my knuckles barely grazed the polished brass before the door swung open. Mom stood there, pearl earrings in place, her cardigan buttoned, every hair smoothed back as though she were expecting guests. Her smile was stiff, almost frozen. "Clara," she said, her voice too calm, "you didn't have to come. Everything is being handled." I stepped past her before she could stop me, the air of the house wrapping around me like a vice. It smelled like lemon polish and stale perfume, the kind of sterile cleanliness that hides everything it can't actually fix. My eyes swept across the spotless living room, the glass coffee table without a single fingerprint, the cream-colored couch without a wrinkle, everything in its place, as though chaos could never touch it. But then I saw her hands, trembling. She folded them quickly, tucking them against her cardigan, but I'd already noticed. I turned to face her, my voice sharp. "Handled? Ethan is in handcuffs, the lawyer's reputation is in ashes, and you sat back and let it happen." Her eyes flickered, but she held my gaze, her lips pressed thin. For a moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, her voice cracked, not loud, not rehearsed this time, but small, fragile. "I was terrified," she whispered, "terrified of losing it all, like before." The words landed heavy. I stared at her, waiting for more. She sank onto the couch, her manicured fingers twisting against each other. Her voice wavered as she continued. "When I was younger, before your father, I trusted someone with everything I had. He drained me dry, left me with nothing. When your father died, I thought if I lost control again, it would all disappear. Ethan promised he'd keep it safe. He said you weren't ready, that you'd make the same mistakes I did." My throat tightened. "So you handed him the knife and let him cut me open? You let him erase me?" Her eyes filled, but her chin lifted as if she could hold back the guilt with posture alone. "I thought I was protecting you." "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You were protecting yourself, at my expense." She looked away, her shoulders shaking slightly. The perfection of the room felt even colder now, like the walls themselves were complicit. I wanted to feel pity, to see her as another victim in a cycle of fear. But pity didn't erase the years she'd let Ethan choke me with lies. The PI, silent until now, stepped forward with the box I'd kept on my desk for weeks. He set it gently on the table, its tarnished metal dull against the spotless glass. The note still clung to it, Dad's handwriting steady and familiar. Family trust. Attic secrets. Mom flinched when she saw it. The PI pulled a key from his pocket, found during his digging through Dad's old office, and slid it into the lock. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then the latch clicked open. Inside, beneath old envelopes and folded papers, lay Dad's real will. The ink was faded but unmistakable, his signature strong and steady, nothing like the forged scrawls we'd seen in court. My breath caught as I scanned the pages, my name written clearly, my share restored without conditions. My father hadn't doubted me. He had trusted me. Tears blurred my vision. Relief and grief tangled so tightly I couldn't separate them. All this time I'd been fighting ghosts, questioning my worth, wondering if Dad had believed the worst about me. And here it was. Proof he hadn't. Proof they had stolen everything. I lifted my eyes to Mom. She was staring at the will, her face pale, her lips trembling. For the first time, her mask shattered completely. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered. "I thought I was saving us." The PI shook his head, his voice flat. "You weren't saving anyone. You were complicit." The room went quiet again, except for the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Each second stretched, heavy with truths that couldn't be undone. I looked at her, my mother, once the center of my world, now a stranger sitting in a house that felt like a mausoleum. Part of me wanted to reach out, to bridge the space between us, but the larger part, the part that had been clawed raw by years of control, betrayal, and silence, stayed rooted where it was. She's broken too, I thought, but she still chose to break me. I folded the will carefully, tucking it into my bag. My hands were steady now. The box sat empty on the table, its secrets finally unearthed. As I turned toward the door, the air of the house pressed against me one last time. Perfect, polished, hollow. I stepped outside into the daylight, the weight of Dad's words still warm in my bag, and for the first time in years, I felt like the air was mine to breathe. Denver felt like another world compared to Austin. The air was thinner, sharper, almost forcing me to take deeper breaths. My aunt's house stood on a quiet street framed by tall trees whose leaves whispered whenever the wind passed through. Children's laughter drifted faintly from yards down the block, dogs barked from behind fences, and somewhere in the distance, the mountains carved themselves into the horizon. It was ordinary, but that was the miracle. I finally had space to breathe without someone watching every move I made. Her guest room became my sanctuary. A quilt in soft shades of blue and yellow covered the bed, worn but warm. The scent of lavender lingered faintly on the sheets. Through the window, the Rockies rose like guardians, their peaks sharp against a sky that shifted from blazing gold to purple at dusk. On the bookshelf sat the family photo album I had carried from Mom's house, its leather spine gathering dust, its silence heavy. I couldn't bring myself to open it yet, but it loomed there like an unspoken reminder that the past hadn't vanished just because I left. Every week, I walked into Dr. Alvarez's therapy office. It wasn't big, but it felt safe. Sunlight spilled across pale rugs and shelves crammed with books about healing and resilience. A kettle always hissed faintly on a side table, filling the room with the scent of chamomile. She had placed sketch pads and markers in a woven basket by the chair, telling me I could use them whenever words became too heavy to drag out, so I drew. At first, the sketches were jagged and dark. A faceless woman with strings pulling her wrists, a house with bars instead of windows, a child standing small under towering shadows. The pen dug hard into the page, tearing it sometimes. My tears fell onto the paper, warping the lines until the images looked like they were drowning. One afternoon, staring at another mess of black strokes, I choked on the words that had been eating me alive. What if they were right? What if Dad really thought I wasn't enough? What if I didn't deserve any of it? My voice broke, so thin I could barely hear myself. Dr. Alvarez leaned forward, her gaze steady, her tone gentle but unflinching. You didn't cause their choices. The guilt you carry, that isn't yours. They lied. They betrayed. They chose control. You deserved love without conditions. Her words landed like stones thrown into still water. The ripples of truth spread through me, colliding with years of shame. My hand pressed against my chest as if I could hold myself together. Tears spilled again, but this time they felt cleansing, like rain washing away old dust. Session after session, I unpacked more pieces of myself. I told her about the rejection email glowing on my laptop, about Ethan's sneer when he called me spoiled, about the suffocating cloud of Mom's perfume in the ER. Each memory carried a weight, but each time I laid them down in that room, Dr. Alvarez reminded me they weren't proof of my weakness. They were proof of the cruelty I'd survived. And slowly, I began to believe her. Outside therapy, life started to shift in ways I hadn't expected. I landed a steady job at a small design firm in Denver. The office wasn't fancy. Brick walls with paint peeling in spots, desks crowded with coffee mugs and stacks of sketches, but it was alive. My coworkers greeted me with easy smiles. They asked about my work without judgment, invited me to lunches, and laughed with me over inside jokes that didn't carry knives behind them. It was the closest I had felt to belonging in years, a family I wasn't forced into but chose for myself. Evenings at my aunt's house were simple but healing. The kitchen always smelled of garlic and onions sizzling in a pan, the clatter of her pots grounding me in the present. We didn't talk much about what happened. She didn't push, she just let me be. Sometimes we sat together at the small table, sipping tea in silence, and that silence itself felt like medicine. Yet every time I returned to my room, my eyes drifted to the shelf. The photo album sat there, patient and heavy, its cover collecting a fine layer of dust. Inside were years of frozen smiles, vacations that now looked staged in my memory, dinners where I could almost smell Mom's perfume cutting through the food. My chest tightened whenever I looked at it. I wasn't ready to open it, but its presence reminded me daily, healing doesn't erase. It only teaches you to live with what you carry. One evening, after a particularly raw session, I sat by the window with my sketchpad resting on my knees. Outside, the mountains glowed pink as the sun set, the air cooling into night. My pencil moved slowly across the page, and for the first time, I didn't draw cages or faceless shadows. I drew a figure standing tall, arms wide open, facing the mountains. The lines were softer, less jagged, almost hopeful. Tears slid down my cheeks again, but they weren't corrosive. They were gentle. I whispered to the fading light, testing the words on my tongue. I don't have to beg for love, it's my right. The room felt different after that. The air lighter, my chest less heavy. I wasn't fully healed. The guilt still curled like smoke in the corners of my mind, stubborn and lingering. But there was hope now, stitched carefully into each sketch, each laugh with coworkers, each quiet dinner with my aunt. Hope that maybe, finally, I could build a life defined not by betrayal, but by the freedom to choose the people who deserve to stay. The unopened photo album watched from its shelf, patient as ever. I knew one day I'd open it, but not tonight. Tonight, the mountain air through the window was enough. By 30, Denver didn't just feel like a safe haven. It felt like the proof that I had clawed my way out of a life designed to crush me. The design studio I worked in gleamed with light, sunlight spilling through the high windows and stretching across drafting tables littered with sketches, laptops, and coffee-stained mugs. The hum of printers mixed with the soft buzz of conversation. My coworkers' laughter carried across the space, warm and unguarded, unlike the clipped, careful tones I had grown up with. Each morning when I swiped my keycard to walk through those glass doors, it felt like an act of defiance. Every paycheck deposited into my account was more than money. It was rebellion. It was proof that Ethan and Mom hadn't broken me. Sometimes in the quiet between projects, I leaned back in my chair and watched my team bounce ideas across the room. For years, I thought I had to erase the past to succeed. Now I realized it wasn't about erasing. It was about building anyway. My work, my choices, my survival, they weren't just a rejection of their control. They were my rebellion. Every sketch pinned to the walls was a reminder. I wasn't the reckless failure they tried to brand me as. I was here, I was thriving. But the past still had a way of seeping back. The private investigator reached out one last time, his voice steady but tinged with something heavier. We met in a small downtown cafe, the kind where espresso steamed sharp in the air and conversations blended into a soft hum. He slid a folder across the table, much like he had the first time he tore the truth open for me. "Your mom hid a family debt for years," he said simply. "It explains her fear, her obsession with controlling everything. It wasn't just power. She was terrified of losing it all again." I opened the folder and stared at the faded numbers on old bank statements, documents of borrowed money that was never fully repaid. For a moment, something inside me wavered. I could almost see her younger, cornered by debt, desperate, afraid. That image tugged at me, softening the edges of my anger for the briefest heartbeat. But then the memories pressed in. The locked accounts, her perfume suffocating me in the ER, the way she looked me in the eye and denied me even as I unraveled in front of her. Fear might explain her actions, but it did not absolve them. She could have protected me. She didn't. I closed the folder, my jaw tight. "I'm not forgiving her," I said, my voice low but steady. "Fear doesn't justify betrayal. Not like that." Back at home, the family photo album no longer sat closed, collecting dust on a shelf. It lay open on my desk now, pages splayed like fragile wings. The photographs hadn't changed, stiff dinners, posed vacations, hollow smiles, but I had. Once those images felt like chains, proof of how small I was in their eyes. Now they were just paper. They no longer defined me. Keeping the album open was my rebellion, a way of saying I didn't need to hide from the past anymore. It was part of my story, but it wasn't the ending. Most evenings, I joined my aunt in her wide, open kitchen. Pots clattered, oil hissed in pans, and the air filled with garlic, onions, and warm bread. Spices lined the shelves in glass jars, their colors like little bursts of sunlight. I rolled up my sleeves, chopped vegetables, stirred sauces, and let laughter slip out between us as freely as steam from the stove. Cooking had once been something that happened in silence and judgment in my childhood home. Here, it became ritual, comfort, even joy. One evening, as I slid a tray of roasted vegetables from the oven, my aunt glanced at me, her eyes soft, her smile carrying both pride and tenderness. "You're tougher than they'll ever know," she said. The words sank into me deeper than I expected. I smiled back, brushing sweat from my forehead, and realized she was right. Tougher didn't mean cold or hardened, it meant surviving. It meant choosing to build something new from the rubble of what was broken. Still, in the late-night quiet, when the laughter of coworkers faded and the kitchen lights clicked off, I sometimes wondered, can I ever fully let go? Betrayal leaves deep scars. And even as I thrived, the question lingered, haunting the edges of my silence. But then I would look at the open album on my desk, or the paycheck stub folded neatly on the counter, or the sketches taped proudly to the wall of the studio. And I'd remember, I didn't need to erase the scars. I just needed to keep moving, step by step, proving every day that they hadn't destroyed me. Every paycheck, every drawing, every shared meal was a rebellion, a freedom I had fought for and finally claimed. And if you're listening to this, maybe you've been betrayed too. Maybe you've been told you weren't enough, or that your worth had to be earned. But listen closely. Your worth isn't something you win or prove. It's yours, always has been. Stand up, break free, surround yourself with the people who see you, who value you, who fight for you. So I'll ask you now, what's your story? If you've faced betrayal, share it in the comments. Tell us how you broke free. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our community, because together our voices are louder. Every story we tell here proves the same thing. They didn't break us.